And this is essentially what Donald Trump faces. Now, can he break free of the Israel lobby, some of which are his principal financial supporters in the election campaign, let's face it. But that's what he needs to do as president of the United States. He needs to say, sorry, American foreign policy is American. It's for American interests. It's not for extremist Israeli positions. It's not for delusions, whether based ideas that some of Netanyahu's supporters pursue, or whether it's based on misguided ideas of American power. The situation in Israel and Palestine is similar to the situation in Ukraine. In both cases, there are manipulations by the governments, whether it's Zelensky in Ukraine or Netanyahu, which believe that they have the U.S. Wrapped around their finger, and that they can use the U.S. for whatever bullying or maximalist demands they want. What Netanyahu represents is completely outrageous. It's a violation of every principle, whether moral or legal or pragmatic in terms of peace. But he operates this way because he thinks the U.S. is wrapped around his finger. And so far, that has been the case, actually. While Ukraine did get, massive amounts of U.S. aid to pursue aims that made no sense, when it comes to Israel, the Israel lobby has really effectively dominated U.S. foreign policy decision-making of the United States, even leading the United States to wars in the Middle East on behalf of Netanyahu's grandiose, delusional visions. What are Israel's maximalist demands? To control all of Palestinian territories, to rule over millions of Palestinians in Gaza, in the occupied territories of the West Bank, and in East Jerusalem, contrary to international law, and as a total, complete blockage of peace. When it comes to Ukraine, Trump has finally drawn the line, and he's done it properly. He said to Zelensky, you need to make peace. If you don't make peace, we're not supporting you anymore. And the most recent news is that the United States has suspended all military aid to Ukraine. This is the right approach, given Zelensky's attitude, which is maximalist demands and therefore continued war. Not just maximalist, delusional demands. And when it comes to Israel, the situation is the same. Netanyahu makes maximalist demands, thinking that the United States will unconditionally back those demands. Israel should not run American foreign policy. The United States should. The job of an American president is to do what President Trump has done vis-a-vis Ukraine, which is to say we're not in this for endless war. By the way, the United States provoked that war over 30 years. So Trump is ending a series of disasters that were, to a large extent, U.S. made. In the case of Israel, Donald Trump needs to do the same thing. He needs to say American foreign policy interests is for peace in the Middle East, for American good relations with the Arab world, for American support for Israel's security, but not for America's support for Israel's illegal, brutal, even war criminal occupation and devastation of Gaza and the West Bank. That's the choice in front of President Trump. When students protested, they were arrested. Universities tried to tamp down the protests, but the students were watching the TikTok videos showing Israeli soldiers celebrating the destruction of Palestinians in Gaza. This is so tragic, so much in front of our eyes, so shocking. And I always say it's the job of an American president to put the brakes on war. President Trump is ably doing that in the case of Ukraine, and he should do the same in the Middle East. What Israel is doing is criminal by every standard of international law, as well as basic morality. Israel has deliberately tens of thousands of innocent women and children and starved a population of 2 million in Gaza. And while this is going on, Israel is committing massive crimes in the West Bank that are less reported because the bigger crimes are in Gaza. By the way, when Zelensky doesn't want to listen to President Trump, says, okay, then you're on your own. Say the same to Netanyahu. It's not that the U.S. can force Netanyahu to do something. It's just that Netanyahu's using U.S. bombs, U.S. munitions, U.S. artillery, U.S. intelligence, U.S. finance to do it. So President Trump just needs to say, we're not going to be party to this any longer. We can't stop you, but you can't do it without us. That's what President Trump said to Zelensky, and it's exactly what he should say to Netanyahu. But idea of the U.S. go very successfully has been, well, pick this apart. Let's try to get the Saudis on our side, or the Emirates, or Qatar, or others, rather than having the united voice of the Arab world. When you ask me what will happen, I truly hope, that the Arab world speaks with a unified, dignified, firm, clear voice. It has the overwhelming majority of world opinion on its side. In fact, 95% of humanity live in countries that want the two-state solution, 95%. But the United States pushes, the Israel lobby pushes, Netanyahu manipulates. And because of our political institutions at this point, Donald Trump will have a very big effect on this. If he listens to what the Arab countries are saying, Donald Trump can make peace for the first time in a century in the Middle East based on basic justice, that there is a Palestinian state. That's, I hope, what the Arab countries continue to make clear. The Arabs have been manipulated by the Western world, first by Britain and France as the dominant imperial powers, and then after 1945 by the United States. The principle is an old Roman principle, divide et impera, divide and conquer. The whole idea of U.S. policy has always been to prevent a unified Arab voice. This is a story that goes back a century. The Arabs were largely under the domination of the Ottoman Empire until the end of World War, and had also been picked apart by Britain and France as the two imperial powers of North Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean. Since 1921, essentially, so for a century, the Arab League, which is the group of Arab nations, and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation have repeatedly said in now more than 20 years, they want peace, they want normalization of relations with Israel, but on the basis of a Palestinian state living alongside a state of Israel. Everything in our mainstream media hides that call by the Arab world and by the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. You will not read these things in the mainstream media, how the Arab world, and by the way, Iran is a member of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, have been sending every possible peace feeler trying to reach the Biden administration and now the Trump administration to say we want peace, but on the basis of international law, justice for the Palestinians, and not that the Israeli extremists want. Now, at the United Nations, essentially every country in the world, except for Israel, with its extremist government, and the United States as Israel's so far unconditional backer, support the two-state solution. It's not literally every state, because when the U.S. votes, countries like Micronesia, by treaty, vote with the U.S., Nauru, Palau, Paraguay, a few tiny countries vote with the U.S., but 95% of the world population votes for two states. And this two-state solution for peace has been endorsed just in recent months by the G20, by the BRICS countries, by the Arab League, by the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, by the UN General Assembly, and by the UN Security Council. But in the UN Security Council, there was a veto of the state of Palestine. That veto was the US veto. So if the United States changes its sole vote in the UN Security Council, then Palestine will become the 194th member of the United Nations on the borders of the 4th of June, 1967. And on that basis, the entire Arab League countries and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation have committed to peace and to normalization of diplomatic relations with Israel. This is what we just heard. The U.S. is the blockage to peace that the entire world, other than Israel's extremist government, wants. What Donald Trump can do and should do as president of the United States is to say, first, American foreign policy is American. It's not Israeli, it's American. Second, our interests are in peace, avoiding World War III, avoiding escalation of war, avoiding Netanyahu's plans to have a war with Iran, avoiding mass bloodshed and war crimes in Gaza and the West Bank. Third, we are not going to be complicit in these war crimes, just as President Trump has stopped the arming of Ukraine because of its extremist demands. So too, the United States should stop the arming of Israel because of its extremist demands. That is, until there is the two-state solution. And the United States can make that happen, actually irrespective of Israel's opposition, because Israel doesn't have a veto on international law. So what this gentleman, this great director, said is literally true. The United States is the sole blockage of peace in the Middle East now. Israel, of course, doesn't want it, but the United States is the one that blocks the peace in practice. There are extremists on both sides of this Palestinian-Israel divide, but they are not the majority at all, and they manipulate. I work at the United Nations, as listeners know, and I speak with the UN permanent representatives, that is the ambassadors to the UN from all over the world. There is an overwhelming consensus in the world, overwhelming consensus that there should be a Palestinian state living alongside the state of Israel, who is a demagogue and a man of violence. His colleagues in the Israeli cabinet, people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, are zealots who would mask the Arab population, who would cleanse the Arab population. This is not subtle. It's not hidden from view. It's in our sight every single day. How will two groups, the Israeli Jewish state, as they call it, and Palestine, live together? What the Israeli government says very explicitly is there will be one country, that's Israel, dominated by, it will be a Jewish state, and it will rule over the Palestinian people. But the only way to peace is what we call the two-state solution. There needs to be a Palestinian state for the Palestinian people. There needs to be a state for Jewish state for the Israelis. This is obvious. This has been what international law and UN Security Council resolutions and UN General Assembly resolutions have said for decades. This is the opinion of the vast majority of humanity. But the Israeli government has opposed it, and the United States government has backed Israel. And Israel's approach is, you don't like it, we'll go to war with you. Yeah. And so there are wars all over the Middle East, but who actually arms these wars and pays for them? It's the United States. So my view is the United States needs to understand what an American-based foreign policy is, and that is two states, and then there's peace. There are roughly 8 million Jews in Israel and 8 million Palestinian Arabs. And Israel, which has what I regard as an extremist government, after all, its prime minister has an arrest warrant on him by the International Criminal Court, And his government, as you say, is in the dock at the International Court of Justice for the crime. So I regard it as a very extremist government. That extremist government says one state, ours, never a state of Palestine. To tell you the truth, I don't know whether we are at the end of that hyper arrogance or not. I think we're at the end of the war in Ukraine. I'm convinced of it. I think President Trump has this right. And there's a lot of deep state forces telling him, no, go back. You got to put on sanctions. You have to recharge Ukraine and so forth. But I think he understands this is completely a losing hand. And I think the Europeans, as foolish and idiotic as they are in their rhetoric right now, can't do anything about it. So the war will end. It could end on the basis of the Istanbul draft agreement, April 15th, another of these profound missed opportunities, because could have had 1 million Ukrainian lives saved, people who are, none of it needed to happen, because even a month after the special military operation started, there was a draft agreement to end it. And the United States and UK, of course, famously said no in their arrogance, in their poker playing. We'll raise the stakes. We'll bluff Russia. They'll never mobilize. They'll fold when they see the economic sanctions and so forth. And that's probably 1 million or more casualties of Ukrainians that moment. So for me, the big question is, are we done with this phase of war making relentlessly in history? One war is going to end soon, Ukraine. The Middle East, it's big stakes. And what will happen with the U.S. and China? Again, there are a lot of arrogant thinkers who could lead the U.S. and the world into complete disaster unless they learn some diplomacy. We have other conflicts. I hope we can talk about them soon. The Middle East scares the wits out of me because Israel has controlled U.S. foreign policy for decades. I don't know whether that's over. I want Donald Trump to have an America foreign policy, not an Israel-made foreign policy. If he does, that war could end immediately also, because that's also a war of choice. Do you back Israeli extremism, which the United States has done for 30 years in its arrogance and its foolishness and its recklessness, or do you have peace in the Middle East?